couple notes. I didn't feel like changing my shirt, so I'm going to put this one up on the vault. But I did a video a couple days ago that got me more hate than pretty much any video I've done in a long, long time. And it's the one I talked about with the pilots. And a bunch of pilots contacted me or commented under the video, and we're talking about how I'm out of my depth talking about anything to do with flying or pilots because I'm not a pilot myself. And I'm not a pilot. In fact, I think I said that in the video, but it should be pretty clear that I've never claimed to be a pilot. I mentioned I know a few pilots. In fact, I even know a guy who works the NTSB. But if you get angry about a story I do, you should listen to where the source of the story is and ask yourself if you're going to be angry with them also, because the story I did was from the Washington Post. And so if you get upset and say, hey, Steve, you're making stuff up, you don't know what you're talking about, well, go look at the story that I referenced and see if it's in there, because if it's in there, you got bigger problems than some guy on YouTube. You got a story in the Washington Post. And so in case you don't know, what the story was is two federal agencies, the FAA, airplanes, and the VA, veterans. And somebody in the government said, hey, wait a second. There are people who are getting disability benefits from the VA, but are also flying airplanes, and some of them never listed any disabilities when they're going through the process to get their commercial pilot certification licensing, etc. Purposely said it that way. And they said we should probably take a look to make sure that someone who's getting disability benefits over here is still capable of flying over here. And I said in the video specifically that very well could be the case. Very well could be the case. And I had a lot of pilots who also said, Steve, we completely understand what you're talking about, but you need to be aware of this, that, and the other thing, and that's fine. That's fine. But the point is that people were actually saying, but Steve, you got the story completely wrong. I had a guy send me an email and he said, Steve, in the future, if you're going to do a video about pilots, you need to write out word for word what you're going to say and submit it to a pilot and let them read it. And then let them proofread it and then let them correct it, and then you can do the corrected version of your story on your video. Ain't going to happen. Number one, I don't write out any story I'm going to do in advance. Number two, why would I let a pilot rewrite a story I'm doing? Like, how do I choose the pilot? Do they do this for free? Is this a service pilots offer? And I had one guy write to me, go, Steve, you got everything wrong. You kept referring to licenses and certifications. You're mixing and matching. I'm trying to explain stuff in plain English here. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty distinctions and minutia that no one cares about. Let's just say that to become a commercial pilot in America is difficult and requires some kind of permission from the government, okay? What you call that, I don't care. I actually had a guy go, Steve, you listed a bunch of licenses. You left out the one for hot air balloon pilot. Hot air balloon pilots are licensed. Oh? Do you remember how many hot air balloons were mentioned in that story I did? I don't mention everything in every video, otherwise my videos would never end. Okay, I've got to draw the line somewhere. So for those of you who think I was being too harsh on pilots because I mentioned that there's this controversy going on at the federal level, who accused me of making up the story or getting the story completely wrong, I'll read to you another version of the same story. This is not the Washington Post, okay? So a guy named Jim Moore wrote this. The FAA offered a path to reconciliation for military veterans who may not have reported receiving Department of VA disability benefits on their pilot medical certification application. So the FAA has offered a path to fix this. More than half of those cases have been closed, and other veterans are being given a chance to reconcile their pilot medical records and continue flying through a process set up by the FAA. The FAA replied in June to a request made back in March, calling on the agency to follow the same amnesty-first approach adopted for similarly systemic problems in the past, and posted much of the same information in June on the blog site Medium. Specifically, the FAA said that it had worked with the VA to determine that nearly 4,800 certificated pilots might have submitted incorrect or false information about certain medical conditions that qualify for Veterans Administration benefits as part of their most recent FAA medical application. Now, that's a quote. I didn't make that up. That's a quote that the FAA said. And there's no question they said it. So again, 4,800 certified, nearly, pilots might have submitted incorrect or false information about certain medical conditions that qualify for Veteran Administration benefits as part of their most recent FAA medical application. Now, a lot of people said to me, they say, Steve, but it sounds to us like you don't understand what's going on. Don't assume that things I didn't say were in my head, okay? It's very, very clear that there's two problems here. One is, if somebody is disabled over here, but they fill out an application over here saying, I'm not disabled, you can understand why somebody might look at that. We're not saying you should ground the pilot. You should look at it, which is what the FAA says they're going to do. You can also see why someone might say, if you were asked, do you have any disabilities, and you said no on a form you're filling out for the federal government, that statement, if it is not correct, might be a problem, okay? So that's the issue. Don't think I'm reading more into it. Don't think I'm hinting. Don't think I'm saying anything other than what I've already said. So meanwhile, there have been calls on the agency to follow previously established procedures, such as the process that provided amnesty for pilots who did not disclose DWI or DUI convictions under a 1990 rule, followed in 2010 by medical certificate amnesty offered for those who had not disclosed use of antidepressant medications and related treatment. The appeal to the acting administrator followed months of work as the FAA investigation launched in 2022, and it ramped up. It was noted that the large number of affected pilots identified as having received some type of disability benefit they did not report to the FAA is evidence of a systemic problem. So this is someone else calling it a systemic problem, not me. Acting Deputy FAA Administrator Katie Thompson responded that the agency's investigation was triggered by a referral from the U.S. Department of Transportation Inspector General's office, and that the FAA recognizes the sacrifices our veterans made in the service of our country, and we thank them for their service. And by the way, I have the utmost respect for anybody who served their country in any capacity. Overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated. My hat's off to you. I salute you. I absolutely do. Okay? Similar language is used on many letters sent to individual pilots to date. FAA medical staff determined that 60 of the nearly 4,800 pilots flagged for investigation may have disqualifying conditions, and those individuals were told that they must cease flying unless and until they obtain a new medical certificate or an authorization for special issuance. So in case you want to do the math on that, 60 pilots out of 4,800 were flagged. That's 1 out of 80. 1 out of 80. And I'll grant you that is an extremely small number, which is what many people are going, Steve, you don't understand, it's a small number. Now, I do understand it's a small number. I know how numbers work. The agency has also closed about 2,550 other cases from the initial group after determining that the cases had been resolved or that the pilots had either already reported the conditions in question correctly or were included in the initial group referred for investigation due to administrative error. By the way, the feds make mistakes. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, despite the fact it's not written here. I believe I'm safe in saying that, but if you want to argue with me and say, Steve, the feds never make mistakes, comment below. About 1,250 pilots in the initial group no longer hold valid medical certificates, though some may be flying under basic med, but the FAA continues to review these cases. Or it may be that only pilots who receive a letter from the FAA offering the reconciliation process are eligible to participate. They're still investigating that. The resolution timeline varies somewhat by medical certificate class. First-class medical certificate holders who are notified by the FAA must submit a new application and schedule an appointment with an aviation medical examiner no later than July 31st, while second-class and third-class certificate holders are also directed to reapply and schedule an AME visit before their current certificate expires or January 31st, whichever is sooner. And yes, I know July 31st is behind us. The agency noted that medical certification requirements also vary and include in the recent blog post a link to the online medical certificate application along with other information. Here's a quote. In recognition of our veteran service, as well as their shared interest in aviation safety, the Office of Aerospace Medicine and the FAA Chief Counsel's Office hope to confine legal enforcement action to only the most egregious cases meeting certain criteria. Without elaborating on what those criteria are, Additionally, airmen who are not medically qualified may be subject to legal enforcement action due to their lack of qualifications to hold a medical certificate. Meanwhile, attorneys and medical certification experts have worked to inform and advise affected members, an effort that ramped up quickly as the FAA began flagging medical certificate applications with no reported disability that matched names listed in the VA database as receiving disability benefits. Much of the problem stems from the medical certificate application form itself and misconceptions about the need to report even those disabilities without obvious effect on fitness to fly, such as tinnitus or carpal tunnel syndrome. And I had quite a few people point that out, and some of them were just making conversation. That, for instance, if you have tinnitus, the ringing in your ears, but you can still converse, you can hear, that might be a disability under the one regime, but not under the other regime. So it might make complete sense that, yes, these people consider you to have a disability. These people don't. I understand that, okay? Meanwhile, what I just told you pretty much aligns with everything I said before. And you might be saying, but Steve, you just found somebody who agrees with the Washington Post. I actually just read to you a letter from the AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And that was written by Jim Moore for the AOPA. So it says FAA offers medical reconciliation process to some veterans. So when I had typed in FAA, VA, disability, this was one of the top 2 or 3 hits I came across off the AOPA website. And all of the pilots in the audience know what the AOPA is. It's the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. They look out for pilots. And I did modify slightly what this man wrote to make a point. So, for instance, the first sentence I read as the FAA offered a path to reconciliation originally read the FAA responded to an AOPA request. Because I wanted to point out that the facts of the story are pretty much the same. The only difference being that these guys are leaning heavily on here's what you need to do as a pilot because this might affect you. Whereas the Washington Post article was written in such a way as this is what you need to know because it might affect you if you fly, meaning as a passenger. Okay? So getting back to the original problem here, and the problem being that there's something going on that has people up in arms, and that is that there's the Veterans Administration, the VA, and if you're a veteran dealing with them and you have any disability, you talk to them about it if the disability has to do with your benefits that you can get as a veteran. Now, many professional pilots came from the military, okay? And to be honest with you, if you said, Steve, you can have a choice. The pilot of your aircraft can be a person who flew airplanes during Gulf War or jets. Or someone who just simply went to a local school, got a license, worked their way up, and now they're working here. Which one do you want? I want the veteran. I want the military experience. It's the discipline. It's the hard work. And don't get me wrong. Pilots who didn't go through the military might have those things too. But guess what? The ones who did got it. I know they do. Absolutely, I know they do. And so I'd rather have the veteran myself. And so if you said, Steve, do you understand that your veteran who's flying your plane has qualified for some disability benefits with the VA? Okay. Does it affect his or her ability to fly this plane? No, I don't care. I don't care. So I guess that some people thought because I did the story, and that's one problem I often have. People say, well, Steve, you did this story. It must mean that you feel this way about it. No, I thought it was newsworthy. I thought it was interesting. I actually remember when I read the story, just looking at it going, that's an interesting concept. And I can understand why the government's investigating. And by the way, I don't blame the government for investigating at all. But the question is, how long will the investigation take and what's going to happen to the people who are caught up in the investigation before they're cleared to fly, if some of them are grounded in the meantime? It sounds like it's not happening to a lot of people, but it sounds like there was also a lot of confusion on the parts of some pilots. Now, I can never tell you whether or not the people who comment on my videos or write me emails really are who they claim to be. I had quite a few people say, Steve, I'm a pilot. And when asked by the FAA, do you have any disabilities, and however it's worded, and I don't know how it's worded, so don't get upset about that, but however it's worded on the documents that you fill out, if you say no to that, okay, And if you should have said yes, based on what you told the VA, there could be a problem. And it looks like the guy from the AOPA even says there can be some confusion on that. And so what they're asking for is two things. One is clarification going forward, and two, a way to reconcile this or to fix this, to make it better for those who might have gotten caught up in it. And it sounds like they pointed out a couple other examples, including the DUI, DWI convictions previously, and also the use of certain antidepressant medications. Okay, I guess they've had those issues in the past where they said, oh, we've got this new rule, and people are like, what about somebody who, before, so they had a reconciliation situation, and they fixed it. So they're saying they're going to try to get this fixed also, and the AOPA stepped up and is handling this as best they can on behalf of their membership. Okay, so my point simply is this: I did not make this story up. I did not say all these pilots should be grounded. I did not, no. I was simply pointing out that somebody noticed at the federal government level, and you can imagine that there's people sitting around nothing better to do and go, oh, hey, let's take a look at that. And somebody noticed that you've got almost 4,800 pilots who have listed on one form with the VA a disability, and on another form, no disability. What I just said right there was 100% correct. Whether or not it affects hot air balloons, I don't care. Okay? So no, I'm not going to ask pilots to proofread everything I write in the future. And no, I don't make this stuff up. And so just to let you know, all the pilots out there who are upset with me, who think I'm making stuff up or exaggerating numbers, you can read this wonderful piece written by Jim Moore for the AOPA. And as I've mentioned before, I'm not a member of the AOPA because I'm not a pilot, although I wear a watch that a lot of pilots like. But I can tell you, as I mentioned, I may have said I know 3 or 4 pilots. I actually know 5. I was realizing this after I did the video. I know 5, one of whom does work for the NTSB. But I'm not going to waste their time by saying, do you want to proofread a script for a video I'm about to do that mentions pilots? So there you go. I'm sorry. If you want to hear an apology, there you go. I'm sorry. But really all I'm sorry for is that you misunderstood what I was saying. Questions or comments, put them below. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.